forlorn monsters today. This is it, ladies and gentlemen. This is day one of our 1000 Dawns. So, for the benefit of those who have just discovered this little video, allow me to explain. The story of this mini-series, if you will, going forwards, it's very, very simple. Now that I've got my life back, what exactly am I going to do with it? That's kind of the remit, if you will, for the first number of days until we can get an idea about what we're meant to be looking for. But before we have a start at exactly what we're looking for, we have to find out how exactly things came to be right now. What exactly has led me to start this miraculous journey? And furthermore, what exactly have we learned in the process of getting to this point? For you see, there are a lot of quantities and qualifiers to questions like these. The biggest one, or the one that certainly springs to mind, is the idea that for years I feel like something has been taken from me. Something that was stolen, that nobody had the right to steal from me. Something that you can't just buy back. And for quite a long time, I've often wondered what exactly it was. Because it's not really one of those things you can point and say that was precisely at that moment. Because I honestly don't really know where I can pinpoint a moment like that, certainly in my history. But if we have to start this story somewhere, let's start, ironically, with the day that I died. Yeah, you may argue in some way that seems like we're starting at the very end of the story, but let me roll you back the calendar. So our story really begins, if you will, April 29th, 2011. For quite a lot of people, it means the marriage between Prince William and Kate. For me, however, it was the day that I you see the story was that my family wanted to spend a whole day out in the country so that we didn't have to hear anything about the news or anything like that, or the events going on. So to cut a long story short, and among many other things happening, I had a bit of a freak accident where I fell down a mountain. That's pretty much cutting a very long story short. But let me tell you about the exact moment when that moment of death happened. I was at the very bottom of the hill, just where it leveled out, and I sort of like went forwards like that. So again, it was kind of like boom, and if I hit like any slightly harder surface of the valley floor, I would have absolutely have been killed. With that being said, however, no, I wasn't killed. I think I was knocked out for the best part of about a second, probably something like that, because what happened is that I blacked out. I hit the floor, blacked out. There was no pain. It was just a little bit of a shock, and I remember I sort of like remembered rolling onto my back, but it was kind of one of those, one of those moments where you feel like it happened, but you haven't put any sort of weight or energy into what you were doing, and it just sort of happened. Well, that's exactly what it was. I was just sort of like looking at the grayish looking sky, and before I think I was on my back for about maybe 5 seconds before I kind of just sort of like sat up and kind of like got back up to my feet. Yeah, somebody who pretty much fell down a mountain and pretty much just sort of got back up immediately. Prior to the surprise of literally everybody, especially my own family. the relevance of this little episode, ladies and gentlemen, is that I I do genuinely believe I was dead for about a whole second, because there was like no pain involved in it, only a very violent shock, and then just sort of this vivid blackness that I was a part of for, like, again, a whole second. I think whether you want to argue that was my body went into some sort of like emergency sort of situation where it had to brace for impact the best way it could, or whether or not I was just knocked. That's what happens when you get knocked out, or I really was dead for a whole second. I mean, do you take your pick, ladies and gentlemen? I think it's highly up for debate. But here's the thing, even people who are knocked out for a whole second, they don't get back up on their feet as quickly as they do. I feel like, you know what, when it's nap time, I think, yeah, you're going to be down for a little bit more than a few seconds. So after about 3 minutes after getting up, the pain started settling in. And about 2 hours later, I was... they were planning to put me in surgery on the Sunday afternoon. Now, for relevance, ladies and gentlemen, here's the scar, by the way, of this particular episode, and it's also where they had to screw in a metal plate between collarbone and shoulder. It wasn't even the first time I'd broken my well, technically I broke my collarbone for the second time. The first time around, I broke my collarbone and my shoulder about 5 years before this. Not a very nice experience, ladies and gentlemen. I can tell you that much. Anyway, so what I got told when they had the initial X-ray and they had to like start organizing how they were going to put me through surgery. I'll certainly say this much because I was at the RVI in Newcastle. The fact that they managed to get me seen and to get me a plan for surgery 2 days later is nothing short of miraculous either, because I don't really remember, like, there were certain things about what was going on that was a bit interesting. I can't remember if like I was on any painkillers or anything like that, but anyway, the point is, ordinarily the doctor demonstrated that this is what your collarbone in theory should be looking like. He told me that this is what I had done to my collarbone. Ready? Yeah, he said that I pretty much severed it in two. And it was probably because, again, when I broke it the first time, there's a bit of a weakness to it. I could still sort of move, like, my fingers and stuff like that, but there was absolutely no way I was going to be able to, like, lift my arm, like, any higher than here. Yeah, that was absolutely not going to happen anytime soon. The consequence of this accident, ladies and gentlemen, is that it meant that, well, it means I probably never play rugby ever again because, it depends who you ask, but one really bad injury, and, well, from what I understand is that if I broke this again, they would probably have to maybe consider amputating the whole arm. So, yeah, not necessarily the sort of thing I want to risk repeating. Since, interestingly enough, that incident, nearly 15 years ago this year, that was pretty much the very last time I ever remember having to go to hospital for anything. I mean, I've visited family and stuff like that in hospital, but I've never had to, I've never been through casualties since 2011. Good, I reckon. You know, if you could afford to stay healthy, then you may want to cherish that, because it's not fun being ill, and it's certainly not fun at the knowledge that you probably were dead for a whole second. And I mentioned this whole thing because it didn't occur to me at the time, and it doesn't even occur to me now, that I probably should have maybe said something to hospital staff that I felt like I died for about a second, or something like that. I don't know what sort of good that would do, because I'm not entirely sure. Psychiatric therapy was 100% necessary, because I wasn't really too sure what I only really contemplated on, like, what some other like after effects of the accident were like years later, because, well, during the time, and because I was in school anyway, it didn't seem important at the time, and I'm not entirely sure where on earth what this whole thing could have led to. With that being said, um, the adventures of like school after this, because it didn't take them long to hear about what had happened. So I had about a week off school, because this was during the Easter break and stuff like that. And okay, so I was off school for the week. By the time I got back, they had to put certain things in place where I would have to leave class like 5 minutes before everybody else, so that I wouldn't get caught up in the corridors and people wouldn't charge past and possibly do even more damage. A few people, when I did get back to school, did comment and ask me what had happened. And because I had had my arm in a sling for about 2 weeks, even when I got back to school. When I got back to school, because curiously enough, when I was in the middle of an art class, the art teacher I had at the time, she was very, very insistent that I was going to have to take the sling off, because I was going to have to use my other hand to do it. I didn't argue, by the way. I was going to argue, but to be honest, the art teacher I had at the time, she's kind of one of those people who will always, always get her own way, even if it's demanding something completely and utterly unreasonable. And yeah, that's kind of sort of how it was. Anyway, so the whole thing came and went after about a week before like another half-term break. And this was around about the time that Geordie Shore, ironically, was debuting on the airwaves on MTV. It's kind of funny how that the stars seem to align in some cases. I remember, honestly, the announcement of the show, by the way, was also, for what it's worth, just as a little bit of a footnote. I'll just say, the very next day after the first episode of Geordie Shore aired, Steve and Karen on the Capital Morning Breakfast Show, before they left for Metro and stuff like that. I preferred Capital when it was previously called Galaxy. Tell me if you remember that, by the way, guys, because that just about shows my age. Anyway, when they were talking about the show, well, they didn't really talk about the show. Steve was kind of beside himself, as though he couldn't quite believe what he had seen. Karen, on the other hand, she literally said that she had just about seen it all, and there was no ending to her into her foray, if you will, into. She thought it was the most trash, the most embarrassing thing she's ever seen in her life, and words failed her in what on earth she just witnessed. She said she just couldn't believe it, what she had just witnessed. Yeah, curiously enough, some of you may not realize this, but especially for a Geordie like me and others who heard things about this show, it really did seem to take quite a lot of people by surprise that all of a sudden, like, the most trashiest of American trash reality shows had actually made its way here to the UK, and seemed to sink its claws into the northeast of all things. It's something that, to be honest, nobody could believe or conceive was going to be a thing possible. Why MTV for executives thought Newcastle was going to be just the place to do this offshoot, this spin-off, if you will, of Jersey Shore it's a good question because here's the thing, they were ready to like jump ship anyway, and because they did another show very, very similar to Geordie Shore called The Valleys. I don't know if some of you may remember. It's about a bunch of people who lived in Cardiff. They were like influencers, fit personal trainers and whatnot. I've never seen The Valleys for myself because I think it didn't take people too long to realize it's just another version of Jersey Shore. There's already 2 of these out there. We did not need a third. Yet, ironically, it strangely enough, I think it's like one of those programs that I think existed in the wrong decade. Because take a look at what's going on right now. Italia Shore, Aussie Shore. When you think about it, actually, to be honest, this kind of idea, it's booming. And to be fair, Jersey Shore kicked it off, and Geordie Shore made it stick. Now, I mentioned this because it was about this time last year that I actually did start watching Geordie Shore literally from the very beginning. And I'm currently up to about the 10th season right now. I'm about halfway through it. And if I'm being fair, my opinions about the show are very, very different from when I first started watching it to now. Because it's not quite as it seems, or people would lead you to believe. And you know what? It's such a strange experience that, to be honest, I still question myself to this day about why I watch the show, let alone like the show as much as I do. It's a very, very weird parasocial like really. Is it because it is set in the Northeast? It just might be. Is it because it actually makes the outside world look a little bit more alluring and actually more wanting to be involved because it's happening in areas you know by name and by heart? That just might be the case as well. Now, that's kind of like that's pretty long for a footnote if you ask me. So in order to pull this all to a close, ladies and gentlemen, maybe something about me died that day. Maybe I didn't die personally, but maybe there was something about me that died on that day. And I don't really know what it was, because I'd always been a little bit of it. For the most part, I do consider myself to be quite reclusive and quite reserved, because I do enjoy my own company, which at times I think suits the rest of the world just fine. But I feel like it was following that accident, I felt almost... It's a bit like almost if you completely rubbed out a certain part of a man's life. It's like if years were taken off my life at that point, because I never really considered myself to be a teenager, for the lack of a better term. I always kind of saw myself, because it seemed as if school and the world around me kind of saw me as a young man. But I think they almost saw me too much like a young man, and not that little space between childhood and adulthood, adolescence, being a teenager. And there's something about just kind of the way it was, and I don't really know, because people have always said that they always thought I was quite wise when I was in school, and they always seemed to think that I was like quite a lot more mature than some other people and stuff like that. Was it because I spent quite a bit of time on my own before I actually did start coming out of my shell? Who knows? But I also like to imagine there was there must have been something, some aura or some influence I must have had somewhere, because there were even a few occasions where people did actually come up to me, the sort of people you wouldn't expect would come up to me to ask me for advice on, believe it or not, relationships. Yeah, I kid you not, ladies and gentlemen, there were genuinely people who had, I never would have suspected they would have come up to me to ask me for anything, and they were coming to me to ask for advice. And I still, to this day, have not got a clue why that was the case. However, yeah, honestly, it's maybe that is what happened. Um, yeah, the 3 months in which I was a teenager, maybe that's all there was to it, and before you know it, I was knocked into a sense of reality that actually being a teenager literally just means physical changes and not much else. Because to be honest, I stopped growing by the time I was about 13 anyway. Honestly, I've been about this height for the last 15 years. There is no way I am getting any taller anytime soon. So, um, I think that's about it. The more I think about it, that's kind of it's a weird place to begin this this little journey, ladies and gentlemen, because there were other parts of my earlier years I probably could have post the accident that I could have referred to, and I probably will be referring to them at some point in the future. However, what kind of has rattled my cage is that if that's just how it happened, then it's just how it happened. But what if there was something else that was taken away from me? What if it was something that somebody had done? Because to be honest, there's a slightly longer list of things that I feel like people have taken from me, and I kind of want back. But there were also probably just as many things to list that seem to detail, among many other things, um, what I've done in order to get them back. Because guess what? Each man must face his destiny by himself. Maybe that's what happened, ladies and gentlemen. Maybe I've had my sense of destiny stolen from me. I was knocked into a reality in which it only exists minute by minute and nothing else. There is no future. There is only the past, the things that have happened, and the present, the things that are happening. And not only is there no destiny, not only is there any final destination, all that happens in the future is death. And if that's and is there anything else out there in the future outside of death, or even within it? I have no idea. And all of a sudden, you begin to sort of like get an impression that maybe, just maybe, there's going to be a little bit more to my destiny than merely death. I know there must be, but there might be a little bit more going than just that. So we'll have to wait and see, shall we? So I will see all of you guys again next time, and the journey has just begun, and the journey certainly continues tomorrow. Be ready, ladies and gentlemen, because there is work to be done. There is work to be done. Always more work.